Hey folks, first of all, let me tell you, it is cold today, really cold where I am, which makes it hard because my work area for guitar setups is sort of like an outside shed, so it gets cold out there, your fingers get cold while you're working on instruments, and you can't be out there for too long, obviously, because it's so dry. Which brings me to my point. I've had people ask me in recent video comments as to why all my instruments behind me are in cases, both sides of me, all over the room are in cases. I mean, trust me, I'd love to have them out on display, and I often see people's videos with them all over the walls and on guitar stands. But I currently live in a very dry area, and it's winter. And I've found over, the last couple of decades that guitars tend to develop less problems when you keep them in the case. Even with running humidifiers, I keep them in cases. I might keep one on a stand for playing, but I return it to its case if I'm not going to play it for a while. And while guitars like this are waiting for sale, I humidify them for a while, probably 2 or 3 days, and then after that put them in cases. It's just something I do as force of habit. I've had experiences in the past where I've left guitars out and had various problems, from neck warpage to actual cracks in the back and ribs of a guitar, even the top of a guitar if it's an acoustic. So I learned very quickly to just deal with keeping guitars inside cases. And if you live, those of you in the UK probably don't have to worry about this. Unless you have a very pervasive heating system in the winter months that might dry out your house. But usually in the UK they use water radiators rather than air-driven heat sources, so it's very different, and I've never really had the need for use of humidifying that much when back in the UK where I'm from. But here in the US, particularly, I would say in the mountain / desert / southwestern area of the US, where it's very, very dry, particularly in the winter, you can develop all kinds of problems. Instruments can dry out really, really fast. And I often get guitars shipped to me that are just dried out, dry as bones. And if they've been dry for a while, they're liable to start developing issues, warpage, cracks, fissures, seams coming apart, that sort of stuff, where glues dry out. If you're dealing with bowed string instruments, which I often do, the seams use hide glue. They're glued together with hide glue most of the times, and it can give way and really dry. The glue gets very brittle and can crack, which is good because you want those instruments to split at the seams so they can be re-glued rather than the top and back and side surfaces splitting. And it's similar with guitars. Now guitars tend to use much stronger industrial strength white glues, so you don't get so many seams popping with guitars. You can with older guitars. So guitars sometimes, when they dry out, the wood retracts, you get sharp fret ends, you get sometimes cracks in the top or in the back and sides, more liable in the top if it's a softwood like spruce or cedar. And sometimes you can even get ugly neck warpings or humpage from dried out guitars. The string pressure along with the wood retracting, receding, drying out, whatever, can cause havoc. So if you only have 1 or 2 guitars, you can get those little guitar damper things and keep them in your guitar when you're not playing them. Or you can get a room unit like I do. You can hear that Vornado behind me. It's a I think 2 5-gallon tanks on each side. I fill them every other day, probably twice, 3 times a week, and it keeps the room, where I need it to be, around 25-30%, because I've got instruments coming in and out all the time. Also, when I get a new guitar, it's usually been sitting in a warehouse with controlled air, often not humidified properly, and they're often dried out. And I'll leave them on a stand in this room for a few days, and it tends to acclimatize them, sort of get the wood rehumidified. Often it can alleviate any sharp frets, although I often have to do a little bit of fret end trimming as well. But it just seems to, if you let the guitar sit for 2 or 3 days in a humidified room, it tends to sort out some of the problems that they can arrive with. You'll notice that, for instance, guitars with slightly warped necks can sometimes correct, and things like that. So that, I'm just answering a question because it's come up a couple of times. Why do you keep your guitars in cases so we can't see them? Well, I'm not doing them to hide them. I'd love to have them on display, and I do have a couple up on the walls, sadly not in front of the camera, and that's the reason. It's just more beneficial to keep your guitar in a case when you're done playing it, not only for humidity reasons, but so you don't knock them over. When you have a room full of guitars like I do, you can knock one over it and it'll knock 4 others over. So having them in cases just gives them protection. So that's the answer to that question. It's a bit of a pain getting them out of the cases, but I'm so used to it now, it doesn't really bother me. And even in the most severe winters or dry spells, I'm pretty confident that I'm going to get through that period without too much damage with my twin attack of a good room humidifier, keeping it constantly the tanks filled, and the second part is to keep guitars in cases especially when I'm not playing them for a while. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody and that's of some help. But keep your guitars humidified. If you live in a humid area, you don't have to worry about it too much, but too much humidity can also distress your guitars. The guitar swells up and that can sometimes cause problems. So if you're in a really humid climate, it's a good idea to keep your guitar in a case as well, for the opposite reasons. Atmosphere can do a lot of damage to an instrument, whether it's dry or humid, so case protection is a good thing. Obviously some are better than others. The hard shell cases or your really nicely padded bags are a lot better protection than some of the really cheap guitar sleeves. But even just a cheap cover will insulate your guitar from the elements a little bit, so it's good to use them. Alright folks, I'll quit waffling. Just thought I'd put that out there since it has come up a couple of times. I'll see you on the next one.